Thank you both so much for taking the time to be here today.
Delighted to be with you.
So here we are talking about your new book, What Do You Say? How to Talk with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. And I have to say, for me, it was such a great experience to first have read The Self-Driven Child and then this book, because it is such a great continuation to your first book. And as you say in this book, What Do You Say? I feel that many parents can understand the parenting philosophy, the research behind, the importance of connecting with our kids and, being respectful and, setting up that emotional dynamic in the home. But what exactly does that look like in terms of effective communication and some dialogues? I feel that every parent can resonate with that struggle. And as you mentioned in the book, how it happens to many of us, if not all of us, that we think to ourselves, how did that conversation go so wrong? I had this intention of talking to my kid or a teenager about XYZ. I thought it was such an important topic, and they just either tuned me out or slammed the door, and I ended up more angry, and so did they. And then we broke those lines of communication. So I feel this is such a valuable book, and I'm sure your readers have already, attested to that it actually lets you know, oh, this is what it looks like to communicate effectively. Mm-hmm. Because when I read your previous book, The Self-Driven Child, it was so informative, the research behind it and some samples also that you give for dialogues. And then this book helped me sort of land it even more, as you say, short practical tips, transformative sample dialogues, that really help a parent say, oh, I thought this is what empathy looked like, but no, this is judgment. I've been judgmental. And this is what actual empathic, attuned communication is like. So I'm going to follow this and sort of apply it into what my own communication with my kid would look like. What do you feel have been the biggest takeaways that the parents who have read your books that you've heard from what do you feel has been the biggest takeaway for some of them? I'm going to ask Dr. Stixrud in this case.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just what you're referring to, Karemi. It's the idea that, what we're suggesting, this practice of empathy, what we suggest is that the way you really convey empathy is through really careful listening. And letting people, here's what I think you're saying. And this does not come intuitively to any of us, because we're wired to solve, when somebody has a problem, well, you need to do this or this, or to talk about, that's not such a big deal. We're just wired to do that. So it's not intuitive to us. But so many parents read that first chapter on building connection through empathy and validation. And they say, oh my God, just the way I talk to my kid is just, I'm constantly telling him, I'm trying to talk him out of his feelings. I'm not really accepting him as he is, and realizing that this different way of approaching things isn't easy, but it looks pretty promising. Mm-hmm. So Ned, what would you say?
Well, I would add to that. I just despite having co-written a book about communication, I fell into this the other night. I came home. My wife and I had gone out and came home. It was a little bit late at night, and that's my current defense, is that I was tired, and I think everyone was tired. And my daughter's had kind of this ongoing nagging challenge with her shoulder. She got thrown from a horse years ago, and sometimes it flares up. And she started telling me about how it's been terrible, and from my perspective was perhaps exaggerating a little bit, who knows. And I started, I just fell right into, well, have you tried this? Wonder if this would happen. I just started making all of these suggestions. And she just got more and more frustrated with me. And I'm thinking, as all of us as parents do, I hear you, I see it, I get it. So let's get to the act. Let's get to the process of trying to figure out how to solve this. And I thought I had all sorts of wonderful suggestions, but that's not what she wanted to hear right then. She just wanted it. She wanted more empathy and validation, because all of those suggestions can feel to the person like, well, if you'd done this, or if you do this, you wouldn't be in this position. And it feels invalidating, not validating. And I was like, oh goodness. And fortunately, my wife hung around, and my daughter sort of explained to her just kind of what I already knew was right. And so, and the next day I just sent her a note of apology, said, I'm really sorry. I felt when you tell me problems, I naturally want to start solving them. But I understand that those can feel like I'm telling you what you should have done. And that doesn't feel very good. I'm sorry, I should know better. I will keep trying to do better next time. And she just thanked me for the apology, and we sort of got on with it. But it's as Bill said, it's not easy, and it's certainly not intuitive, because if anyone brings to you, particularly someone you love and care about, brings to you a problem, your brain immediately jumps into, how do I fix this? How do I solve that? Which is super important. It's just step 2, not step 1.
Right.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
I just talked to parents the other day of a kid who I think I mentioned in the book, who was telling me she was really depressed. She went through a period she was really unhappy, and she has wonderful parents who I'm just crazy about. And she said, that when I'm really unhappy and I talk to them, they're telling me, well, you should do this or this or that, or it's not that bad. And then she started crying, and she said, it's okay. If they give me constructive criticism, it's okay, but just not when I'm really feeling like this. Mm-hmm. Because, as we say in the book, it's not logic. It's not a solution that calms hard emotions. It's being understood. And the saying is, that children listen better once they feel heard. And I think that's certainly a big part of what we're emphasizing. And I think that's one of the things in the book that parents have really responded to.
Right. And I remember you mentioned in the book how validation is not the same thing as agreeing, because sometimes parents might feel, wait a minute, if I keep validating their feelings, then they're going to think that I'm agreeing with, say, their rude behavior or with their constant complaining. And that's not what you're saying. You're saying that this is different. You can validate and still not necessarily agree.
Right, exactly. And there's this, I think when we were writing the book, we heard about this kid who he came home from school, like in 5th grade or 6th grade, and was really upset because he didn't do well on a test. He said, I really studied for it, and Mr. Johnson put stuff in the test that we didn't even cover in class. And the mom knew the kid spent no time studying, and knew that Mr. Johnson wouldn't put stuff in the test. And so, but instead of saying that, she said, that sucks. She expressed that I feel like that too. If my teacher put stuff in tests I hadn't even studied, that'd feel pretty unfair. And when we can do that, when we can just simply start, the starting point is to seek to understand. So we're just trying to, here's what I'm understanding you're saying. And boy, I feel like that too. Or the validation part is I'd feel like that too, or most people would feel like that. It's normal to feel like that. Even though I know that the way you're saying isn't exactly true, but I'm just responding to what you're telling me. I'm trying to understand your experience. And what we find is just more likely that if we do that, the kid will say, well, I didn't really study that much. Mm-hmm. And we'll start, when we change the energy in that way, and we just take a step back, and our role is simply to understand.
Right. I love how, even though the energy that we transmit to our children is so important, the emotional environment that we create in the home. And as you say in the book, stress is contagious. They'll absorb it, especially if they're very young. They'll just sense our stress, right? Even though that's the case, words are so powerful. And that's why this book in many ways is so powerful too, is because not only do you give the research behind the importance of having effective communication, but you show what a difference certain words can make in terms of helping our children to open up. And like you said, right now with the example, it can help them even just feel safe enough to own up to their mistakes. Because otherwise, depending on certain words that we use, such as, don't be ridiculous, your teacher would never put something on a test that she didn't, teach about in class. Just those kinds of dialogues alone will make them close up and not want to own up, because then they're going to feel even more criticized and more judged. And here we are trying to impart wisdom and lessons and, responsibility, when really what we're doing is making them just defend themselves the whole time, right? So right. I love how in the book you show both the importance of the non-anxious presence, which you talk also about in The Self-Driven Child.
Yeah.
and the emotional environment that we create, and working on ourselves as parents. But also you give so many examples of what words are actually effective. One of the things that you talk about that I'd love for you to expand on, the parent as the consultant model. You talk about this in the self-driven child as well, but here you go so in depth into what that looks like in dialogue, and how parents, I feel that many parents can feel maybe a little anxious, right? Wait a minute, I don't want to be just a consultant, because that gives them room to, at the end of the day, not agree. And I want them to agree because they need to do this, right? Because if we're a consultant, say to a company or something, and as you say, you make the analogy, a consultant doesn't argue with a client. A consultant doesn't do more work than the client is ready to put in. A consultant doesn't, do for the client what they can do for themselves. And that's exactly what we need to be doing with our kids, not do what they can do for themselves, not put in more than they are willing to put in, not argue, not criticize, but rather guide. But I feel that even though it's hard for parents to think to themselves, wait a minute, if I guide and they don't agree, what am I going to do? I think we can all accept that when we've tried to control, it has backfired. It has either backfired in that they may obey, but our connection is, fractured, or they, don't want to do it anyways. And then they go off on their own and still, maybe we won't even find out about it. And so can you tell us a little more about what would you suggest could be a sample dialogue for a kid who may be, say, for example, with tech use, how it's important for them to manage it and, not go overboard. And a parent who's anxious and thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to become addicted. What dialogue can I have? What would you say, for example, Ned, to something like that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. There's a lot in there. I mean, part of it is that from our perspective, we want to have influence over kids. When we try to have power over them, then the kids fight what's in their own best interest. And we only can exert power so long as they're in our domain, right? As soon as they're out of our sight, or they're off to school, or they're out of our household, piff, and that kind of disappears. So, with technology is a really complicated one. And kids know that Bill's given a talk at a school, and he said, how many of you think you're on your screens too much? Every single kid raised his hand, every single one. And we know that these are problems with developing brains, but we also know these are problems with developed brains, right? And so we're kind of all in this, together. So if you go back to this idea of how do you have influence over kids rather than trying to control the use of technology, you do this in a way that shows care for kids, which all parents have for their children because they love them, want them to be safe and do well. But you also do it in a way that's respectful. So we talk about really just one of collaborative problem solving, right? And so we say our piece, right? And we set limits. We do this in a way that's collaborative, particularly once they become teenagers, because you don't want to be in a war of a battle for control of technology with a teenager, because you will lose. Or they'll hold it together and then they'll get to college and do whatever they want. So the story in the book that I like a lot, my son, who's now a sophomore in college, is ADHD and just transfixed by video games and screens, and as like so many young people are. And when he was in sophomore year of high school, the game Fortnite came through our house like a biblical plague. I mean, it was all that anyone wanted to play. It was super fun. He's into it, da-da-da-da. And he's playing it more than I, would have chosen, but he was still getting schoolwork done and whatnot. But on a Thursday night when he had Friday off from school, I asked him, so what do you do with your day off tomorrow? And he smiled and he said, play Fortnite. And I say, great. Anything else? He's a musician. I was hoping he was going to compose something or go for a run or whatever. It's like, well, I'll think about it. I'm like, okay. I go to work. I come back 6 o'clock on Friday night. There's my kid. We're still in front of the computer, shooting people, having a whale of a good time. I admit to being a little like, really? It's 6 o'clock, because he's still in his pajamas. A good time was being had, but give me a break. So I was a little annoyed. I'm like, can you finish up and win, die? Just, because weren't we going to go out for pizza? Oh, yeah, my bad. And can you get dressed? Oh, yeah. And he's fortunately more easygoing than is his dad. So he gets dressed. We go out and have pizza as a family. A good time is had. I calm down. I say nothing more. I say nothing on Saturday. I say nothing on Sunday until 5 o'clock on Sunday, which is for boys who procrastinate or anyone who procrastinates. It's kind of the witchy now where you realize, oh no, tomorrow's tomorrow. Oh my gosh. And all the stuff he hasn't done. And so now he's like, oh, I'm such an idiot. Why did I waste all of Friday? I did just played Fortnite. Why didn't I do something? If ever there was an opportunity for parental I told you so ism, this was it. But we were writing this book. So, kind of best consultant mode. You offer help, you offer support. I said, can I I ask you a question? And he says, sure. I said, how long did you spend playing Fortnite? He's like, I don't know, 8 or 9 hours. Was it fun? Oh, it was great. He goes on and on. I validated. Another question. If you reflected on it, how many hours do you think would have been, because you sound pretty frustrated that you wasted your whole day. How many hours do you think would have been sufficient to kind of get your Fortnite fix in, but not feel like you wasted your whole day? He says 4 or 5. I say, okay, last question. Would it help next time if mom or I tried to help you kind of manage your use of technology? So you put some guardrails, right? So you still play, and we're not telling you what to do, but you get a little support so you don't do it too much. Would that be useful? Yeah, I think that'd be great. And now we had buy-in to help him, not feeling like we're nagging him. And again, we did this very purposely, knowing the kid that we got, but also knowing that he was 2 years and change away from going off to some far-flung college with his hopes and dreams, a suitcase full of our money, at which point we'd have no control over how he used technology. So for us, for most things, it's not our job it shouldn't be our job to control our kids, whatever, but to help them learn with our support, with our guidelines, learn to control those things for themselves. Because isn't that our job as parents, to prepare them to run their own lives when they leave our households?
Right, exactly.
And I'll just add, certainly when we first give kids video games or let them use the internet, we want to do it with an understanding of what's appropriate, what's not. We work out guidelines with them. We work out some limits with them. That makes sense. And we work out consequences. So that the idea being that because these games are addicting, that you may want to play much longer than we agree on. And so, what should I do? That if you agree at 2 hours a day, but you're playing 3 or 4, but what should I do? Would it make sense for me to just kind of shut it down for 2 days and give it another chance? That kind of thing. So that it's not that we don't set limits. It's just, especially as they're younger. But as Ned says, I mean, that huge percentage of kids who go to college don't go back after the first year, and a striking percentage don't go back after the first semester. And some of those kids simply do not know how to run their own life. They don't know how to manage. They don't know how to get themselves into bed, to get themselves into bed. They don't know how to get themselves out of bed. They don't know how to turn technology down and do something else. And we think that this is what our job as a parent is, to help kids learn how to do this stuff, to struggle with the same stuff that we have to struggle with all.
Right. I love how you both address, as you mentioned, that this is about helping them to gradually acquire the skills to run their own lives. Because if we're constantly, controlling their use of technology or, XYZ, whatever it may be, then they won't then learn the natural consequences of their actions, but also the skill building that they need to develop. And I love how also you explain with regard to tech use in the book, you talk about what gaming addiction is and what it isn't. And so obviously when it's an addiction, then there are steps to take, but when it's not, and you make the differentiation in the book, the kinds of dialogues that promote what you just said, Ned, about helping, be it the child or the teenager, really learn to manage that use and focus on the other areas of their lives. And I think it's so powerful that you were able to do that with your son, because it's so easy as parents to become anxious about and project anxiously into the future. How are they going to turn out if they continue on this path, right? I think it's so easy to just, get that stress going in our mind and think, if I don't set a limit now, meaning I, the parent, do everything that needs to be done, how on earth is this kid going to develop in a healthy way? But you were able to distance yourself from what was coming up for you and, do what you needed to do to calm down, and then use what research shows, which is this dialogue that is effective and actually helped him open up to, I could, use some help with managing this, instead of, here you are again, dad, controlling everything, because that's totally going to just block him off. But I also love how in the book, with regard to tech use, you talk about first identifying the need that technology might be filling for a given child. Say it's social anxiety that a child is, or a teenager is experiencing, and how sometimes as parents we can come in and immediately judge, say, a teenage girl and say, oh my God, she's becoming like all of her friends, totally fixed on her image and all these selfies. And we come in with this anger sometimes, like, stop being on the phone, instead of doing what you suggest in the book. First, seek to understand. I thought that was so powerful, because they're on the phone so frequently that it's easy for us as parents to just be sick of it, tired of it. But you say, first seek to understand, and you show what that looks like. When I read Seek to Understand, I thought, okay, well, they're kids and, they want to do what their friends do. But then you go beyond that and you actually do show in language what that looks like. Can you give an example, kind of expand on that, about the girl who had a little bit of social anxiety, and how she was feeling that following these YouTube stars made her feel that she knew them and that they were part of like her life, and how her mom in that walk that she took with her helped her to kind of see the need?
I think that when I used to do a lot of psychotherapy, but a lot of times, if I live in Maryland, which is a very blue state, and a lot of times if kids were interested in guns or knives, the parents would be, they think they're going to become a serial killer, and they want me to talk them out of being interested in it. And what I found was that it's just so much more effective simply to show interest in it and try to so what do you love about this stuff? And very commonly, when the parents change the energy in that way, they just ask about it, trying to understand what does this do for you? That the kid lost interest in it. It didn't become some terrible obsession, but so in one of our angles is that if we don't become stuck, our kids don't usually stay stuck. So we're meaning that if we don't get to this very kind of maladaptive, scolding, judgmental, starting out just jumping into judgment, as opposed to try to understand a kid's experience, that it doesn't go well. And I think that, we also talk, I think it's interesting in light of the chapter in our book on change, where we talk about it's so much, if kids are ambivalent about changing. And if we argue one side of their ambivalence, all this stuff is bad for you. Because it's not that they aren't aware of it. It's not that they aren't aware they feel insecure or anxious about social media. So we argue that side, then they argue the other side. And if we start out with kids' social anxiety, just saying, you really feel connect with these people, don't you? That must feel really good. You just trying to understand their experience. We're much more able then to help them see ways in which it's not helpful, not healthy, and the distinction between an internet friend and somebody following the internet, a real friend. Ed, do you want to jump in? Muted.
I think you're muted, Ned.
I'll unmute it. That's a great idea. Thank you. What do I say? Just to add to that, I mean, if to follow up, I mean, if a kid is sitting there all the time on social media, so tell me about this. I did this with my daughter when she was all into YouTube, right? So with these nuts people, this Norse nuts people, how does this work? So what do they do? What's the coolest thing? What have you learned from that? And you try to find all the ways that they're interested, that a kid is interested in them. But if you see ways that it's not helpful, so like with social media, we know that when kids spend 30 to 45 minutes on it, it actually improves their happiness. So the dopamine hit. But the problem is, over more than that, it starts to work against them. So you can say, so what's the coolest part? What are your friends like in this? Who's the coolest? Anyone trending up? Anyone trending down? Try to actually be interested and say, have you noticed that there's a perfect amount of time for you? Do you ever, is there anything like, what annoys you about social media? There must be cool people on, there must be people who really just want to, toss out the window. So tell me about that. And okay, well, what do you not like about them? Does it ever, would you have mixed, does it ever make you kind of sad when you look at people who do this? And you're trying to do this not in a kind of prosecutorial lead the witness to a given outcome. But again,
Right.
trying to understand where they're coming from, because it can really be surprising to kids. I mean, Bill and I, we talked with a lot of educators and reporters, about how hard 2 years of COVID school was, and the assumption that that was a universal experience. Oh my gosh, they're not in school, they don't have their friends, this must be terrible. But both of us had a large chunk of kids for whom COVID school was great. There was no bullying, there was no social pressure, there was no comparison, it was like, I was clear on me what the work is I need to do, I do it, and then I spend the rest of my time elsewhere. And so kids can come to their time on screens for a million different reasons. And if you think you're going to argue this reason, but you don't even know where the kid is starting. And to echo that point that Bill made, and this is really important, even when things aren't going well, people are ambivalent about change. A kid might feel terrible watching 6 hours of social media, of Instagram, and seeing everyone else who's got this perfect life and perfect everything, and feeling so much less for that. But they also have reasons why they want to feel on this, whether it's FOMO or just they don't know what else to do with their time, or they distract themselves from other things that are harder to think about. And so when we use this, what we talk about in the book, motivational interviewing, and it holds the kind of three insights of motivational interviewing. This was done with people who in the 80s with folks who are problem drinkers. And the first thing is that when we see someone we care about who's struggling, we have a righting reflex. We're wired to want to change the person or change the thing that's making our kid or our spouse or everyone having a hard time, and we jump in. The second insight, though, is people that are ambivalent about change. I can see why not drinking would be better for me, but I can also see reasons why I like it. I like the people I hang out with. I don't worry about my problems as much, whatever. And the third thing is that it's the most powerful way to help people change is to create space where they articulate for themselves change talk, the reason to change. And so what we do is we listen and we repeat back. We use reflective listening. What I got from that is this: what you're telling me, Karemi, you kind of like social media because do I have that about right? We have so with this combination of open-ended questions. What do you get out of this? Tell me your favorite part about this. Tell me more. And then reflective listening. And then we create space for kids to articulate for themselves, but it does take a lot of my time. Oh, tell me more about that. How long do you normally spend on social media? And we don't pounce on them because, again, kids are ambivalent. You know, your kid is not a dope. There are reasons why they use this. There are good reasons to not use it. Open-ended questions, reflective listening, and let them articulate for themselves the reason. And that's where we get the change talk and then the change behavior. And then it's our job as the consultant to say, boy, you sound like you're a little stuck there. You really like this, but you also feels like when you spend 4 or 5 hours on it, you don't feel so great afterwards. That's a hard place to be, to like the thing, but then it's kind of, is there a way that I can help with that? Maybe, would it help if we set a limit for only 2 hours at once, and I'll just check in and then drag you away to go walk the dog or bake it? Would that be helpful? Because people who are stuck need help. But as Bill pointed, the harder we pull them, the more they pull the other direction, right?
Right. Right. And I think it also speaks to the point that you talk about parents as a consultant, where you don't want to do more work than they, can do for themselves. If you do all the change language, then I think it's only going to feel for them as if mom and dad are telling me what I need to change, versus them realizing it for themselves. This is this is the change I want to make. Because when it comes out of their own mouths, it really does feel that this is genuine. It's coming from me. I really do want to change this or that, but I just kind of haven't figured out which way to go about it.
And the brilliant reason that you as a parent articulate, if it's repeated too much or with too much force, well, then obviously that has to be a reason that I have to get rid of, right? And so I have a daughter who's a senior in high school who's brilliant and anxious and depressed and stubborn as the day is long. So she's complicated. It's just the brain that she's got. And so I figured out when she was a little kid that I would have to, when she started to get intense, it was just where she was, and trying to give her reasons when she was in that heightened state of heightened activation, heightened emotion was not going to work. And so my job was, and I don't do it perfectly as I described before, my job is when I feel that if she's over here and I'm over there, is don't make the wall higher. Make it as low as possible and make it easier for this other person to tiptoe on your side and maybe even pick up the reason that you've articulated and make it easy for them to make that their own. Don't poison it by beating them over the head with it 17 times, at which point it's toxic and they have to come up with another reason to change their own behavior and motivate themselves.
Right, absolutely. I love those points. One of the things that I'd love for you both to speak about, and oh my goodness, look at this book. Well, for those of you who are listening, you won't see it, but it's just highlighted, and I have all these bookmarks everywhere. As
Thank
a
you. We
coach,
love that.
as a parenting coach, I've already begun using so much of this, wonderful guidance that you guys give, and I love how one of the things that you address in your book is stress tolerance and how to address anxiety. Such a common experience for so many families, anxiety. And I love how in your book, you give obviously several examples, but one that really, stuck with me was the one of a 9-year-old boy who used to share a room with his brother, and then they moved. And then his 12-year-old brother was now going to be in his own room, and the 9-year-old was going to be in his own room. And then he started to have a really hard time, falling asleep in his own room. And the parents, because they had just moved, they stayed with him a few nights until he fell asleep, but then it began to be a pattern, and then he wouldn't, fall asleep if the parents weren't there. And I love how you talk about the way that the parents address this in an effective way, to the point where within a week or so, even though the kid was so incredibly anxious and, even just, no, don't leave, how he was able to turn it around, but not through force, not through the use of punishment or force, but through, as you give in your examples, this reflective dialogue and resilience building. Can you talk more about that, Dr. Stixrud? Oh, you're on mute.
I think now you're muted, Bill. We're taking turns being mute.
Yeah. We have this chapter called The Language and Silence of Change. And it follows the motivation chapter, because when parents say, how do I get my kid motivated? What they're really saying in part, how do I change my kid? And so we started to think about what do we know about how to help people change? And that's where we started talking about the motivational interviewing that Ned was mentioning. But also in this chapter, we talk about the SPACE program, which is this brilliant new program out of Yale, developed by Ellie Leibovitz, that treats childhood and adolescent anxiety and OCD only through working with the parents. And it's as effective at minimizing kids' anxiety as therapy is for the kids themselves. And the couple of the premises are, because we're mammals, when our kids we're wired to protect and to soothe our young. And so we try to protect our kids from experiencing stressful things. And when they're stressed, we try to alleviate that. We try to do the soothing. The challenge is that if they don't learn to do the soothing themselves, if they never experience anything stressful, they don't develop that high stress tolerance that we want them to have. And so the tools that the SPACE program recommends, and that happened in this case, was you say to a kid, I know, you start with empathy. I know that sleeping in your own room is making you really anxious. I get that. I can see how scared you are. And I also know that you're 100% capable. I have 100% confidence you can handle that anxiety. And that's the brilliant turn here that in terms of child's anxiety is rather than trying to solve it, how do we get it down, saying, I know you can handle it. That's what builds that high stress tolerance and that confidence that I can handle stressful stuff because I've done it in the past. And I just talked to a woman who, friend of mine who was just got trained in the SPACE program, who last week was 2 weeks ago, started treating a kid who wouldn't sleep in his own bed. And what happened was the parents realized that they're letting the kid sleep in their own bed. It's not the kid wasn't getting any less anxious. It's actually making him more anxious. And so in the SPACE program, you write out a little announcement to the kid about, I love you more than anything. It's normal to be afraid. I know you can handle it. And we aren't going to, you're not going to sleep on our bed anymore. You make this kind of announcement, but you express that confidence in the kid's ability to handle it. And my friend said, last week, this kid came in and she said, so what's new? And the kid said, I slept in my bed every night last week. This beaming smile. He was so friggin' proud of himself. Even though he was terrified when his parents initially said, you're going to sleep in my room. And I think that that's what we want. We want to be understanding, and also we want to be aware that kids need to deal with stressful things in order to develop that resilience, that high stress tolerance. And we can help them, we can be supportive, but they have to deal with that, and we can really help them by expressing confidence, not that they can handle whatever kind of anxiety or discomfort they experience.
Right. And I really liked how what you just mentioned is not invalidating, oh, there's nothing to be scared of, we're 10 feet away. It's not that kind of language that's not showing confidence in the kid. That's dismissing a feeling. But you are saying, I absolutely get it. It's sometimes we get scared and it's normal. And I'm 100% confident that you can handle this. But obviously you didn't stop there. It's the kid is going to insist if they're really anxious, as they did as he did in the example in the book, and how you recommend that the parent maintain that equanimity, that calm, strong, confident presence of, I remember that the child was insisting that the parents go to bed so he could go to bed with them, or vice versa, so they could, stay with him. And they were saying, no, we're going to finish our show, but, you can sleep in the hallway next to our room, that sort of gradual growth. And he didn't want it, but, I'm not going to give the whole example. Obviously, I want people to get the whole experience in the book. But I love how it's every example that you give includes the validation of the experience the child is feeling, their internal, world of feelings and thoughts, but also the confidence that they can handle their challenges with the parental support. But that doesn't mean enabling. That doesn't mean accommodating. That's different, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think we purposely chose the term stress tolerance rather than resilience, though really it's the same thing. And simply put, the idea that we don't learn to tolerate hard things except by tolerating hard things. And so I think there are a lot of people who are like, oh, the kids today, a bunch of snowflakes and whatever, and believing that all the problem is only that parents protect their kids too much. But the other pitfall is demanding the kids don't feel what they feel. It's not that big a deal. Stop being, just suck it up. Come on, everybody can handle this. What's your problem? And both of those are a problem. And the solution, just as Bill articulated, as Dr. Leibowitz and his colleagues have shown, it's we validate, I understand that this is hard for you. You have reasons to feel this way. And I have confidence that you can do this. And we really need both parts of this, because it's really not the thing that the kid is learning to tolerate, sleeping in their own bed, walking to school by themselves, getting a B- on a test because we wouldn't, let them stay home from school. It's not the thing that they're learning to tolerate. It's the stress that they're learning to tolerate. And so we can validate that I understand that this is really scary for you. It doesn't have to be scary for me. It doesn't have to be true that sleeping in your own bed is scary, but it's true that the kid feels scared. And so we can validate those feelings and say that if confident you can do this, because you can imagine dynamics where between two parents, and one's like, oh, you just coddle that kid to death, and the other parent says, but you don't understand them at all. And they can both be half right in the equation and half wrong in the equation. And so we love this work because it really sees things clearly and sees a path out of here. Importantly, without asking the child to change anything. So this actually increases the sense of control for parents, because there's the Dr. Leibowitz book is brilliant because it's a very clear step-by-step way of how we can decrease children's anxiety simply by changing what we as parents do.
Right. And I think it's so important too that it goes in line with what you mentioned both in this and in your previous book about being a non-anxious presence. Because even though the dialogue is so important, what we communicate, whether or not we ourselves are anxious as parents, is also going to influence, our children's anxiety. And for them, it's going to show up in their own ways, but addressing our own. And as you say in this program, it works on the parent. It's on the parent to make that shift and to look within ourselves. How anxious have I been? what have I been projecting in my own experience? I can completely relate to this. Just a quick example. I had a lot of anxiety growing up as a child because of things that I went through that I didn't start healing and addressing until adulthood. And I realized when my son was really little that I was unconsciously projecting all of that anxiety onto him. And I was seeing how that was manifesting in him. And I was, sort of then beginning to worry about him. But then I had to realize that this was just my pattern to continuously see the what's wrong, because that was sort of my coping mechanism growing up. I had to be hyper vigilant of my surroundings. So I brought that into my own parenting, not realizing that I was making him feel anxious too. And so I had to look within myself and heal what needed healing. And so I think it's so important in your book how you describe, first and foremost, how are we being or not being a non-anxious presence, and then the dialogue that we can communicate with our kids. I know we have very few minutes. I wish we could go longer, but I just want to make sure that I ask you a couple more questions, if that's okay. I have some notes here. Oh yes, you have a chapter or a section rather where you talk about what if I don't want to live up to my potential. And what I loved how you clarify this in the book, because sometimes parents might think, I just want my kid to live up to their potential. They have so much potential. And sometimes unconsciously what we mean by that is I want them to go to the Ivy League, or I want them to, get all the success that I wish for them or that I didn't get. We have the best intentions, but we don't sometimes realize that that's really what we mean. And can you talk a little bit more about what you describe in that chapter?
Sure. I did say to one of my 17-year-old clients is in the book that screw your potential. And the context was that she's friggin' brilliant. She has like 150 verbal. She's really, I test kids I'm a neuropsychologist, and I test kids for a living. And her verbal intelligence is like above the 99.9 percentile. But she's a B student. And she just felt like she was letting everybody down. I'm not living up to my potential. And I test kids' intellectual potential and academic potential by my whole career. But the idea that somehow you're obligated, if you have 150 IQ, to go to medical school or become a rocket scientist, is completely crazy. And the way we think about living up to your full potential is creating a life that you're happy with. Because if you're bored, if you feel like I'm underachieving, if you feel I'm not contributing very much, you're not going to be happy with your life. And so that's what we think, rather than some theoretical idea about accomplishment, the level of accomplishment, that living up to potential means that creating a life that you're happy with, the life that's fulfilling. But by definition, you're using your potential that way. And I think we just see so many bright kids who feel that they aren't very good at something because there's somebody who's better than they are at it. I tell kids, I thank God for all the people all the psychologists in my field who are much smarter than I am. But they can make up theories and they can make up tests that I get to use. I'm not smart enough to do that, but I'm smart enough to have a really interesting job and a really fulfilling job, and have created a life I'm really happy with.
Right, exactly. Yes. And obviously you give so many sample sentences and comments that we can communicate to our kids precisely to communicate that message that, there isn't just one way to have a joyful life, and that there isn't just, there's always a plan B. And I trust that you're going to, I can't wait to see who you want to become when you grow up, just these messages that just exude so much confidence in the child and in their ability to figure things out as they go through life. So anyways,
one of the coolest things anybody ever said to me, it was so long ago, I don't remember who it was. They said, Bill, one of the things I love about raising adolescents was every day when they came home from school, I got to see who they were deciding to become. And that's that consultant perspective where from our point of view, the goal is not to make sure our kids turn out a certain way, because we don't know who they want to be, and they don't know either. Our goal is to help them figure out who they want to be. What kind of life do you want? How can I help you get there? And I just love that perspective, that it's not and we couldn't make them. You try to make your kid turn out a certain way. Good luck with that.
Right.
Let me know how that goes. It just doesn't work. in part because we don't know who they're supposed to be. We don't always know what's best for them. And that's why the wisdom of this idea of a parent's consultant, where it's not that we don't set limits at times, that we want to share our perspective, but the idea, our goal is to help kids be, by the time, before they leave home, have confidence that they can make their own decisions. They can make, with help and guidance that is necessary. They can run their own life, and that they can pursue that path of becoming who they want to be.
Exactly. And this, the parent as the consultant model is completely on the foundation of connecting with them. And I really value so much how you emphasize in the very beginning of the book that connection is, the closest thing to a silver bullet to, promote mental health in a child throughout the lifespan. And so that is it's so backed up by research. And I love how it's not just an idea. You know what, let's try and be consultants today, see if it works out. No, it's actually what is founded on, connection, and connection is the cornerstone of psychological well-being. If we connect with our kids, they learn to connect to themselves, promote mental health. And I'm so grateful for you to have written this book, both as a professional and as a mother. I'm sure that everybody out there who reads it is going to gain so much from it. And there were times where I would close it and think to myself, okay, I've been doing it this way. Okay, no need to, get on this guilt ride. Let's just, shift. What do I need to look within? How can I shift? So I
well, and it's so funny to think about. I mean, if you think about your work as a parent consultant, right? What makes you effective? Parents come to you with a pain point, with a struggle, with their difficulty, with their kids' difficulty. You ask question after question after question until the person really feels like, oh my gosh, she understands what I'm struggling with. She gets it. At which point you have acquired buy-in and you've primed me to then be interested into, well, Ned, let's try this as an experiment for work and see how this works. And it works beautifully because they feel that you understand the problem, and the suggestions that you're giving, you're not criticizing them. All you're trying to do is help. And that's what we want to do as parents as well, is we use our language in ways that are effective, that gets buy-in, so that we can then share with our kids the hard-earned wisdom and advice that we have that's born out of our own experience and our love for our kids. And so we, just like you, there can be few things more painful than being a parent with a kid who is struggling and trying to offer advice that gets batted away with, you just don't understand. Well, yes. And then we say, well, I do understand. Seek first and make sure that you have that sense of buy-in and the kid understands you at the get-go. Then we're working on the same team and we're rowing the same direction, and they're not fighting all the ways that we're already trying to help them.
Absolutely.
And part of the reason why that we came to this kind of parent as consultant idea is that you really can't make a kid do something against their will. So if we think that we're supposed to be the boss who's always in charge, some kids will go along with that, but then they don't develop that kind of self-drive, that self-confidence we want them to have. A lot of kids won't go along with it. Then it's this constant fighting. And once we change the energy, once we realize that that's not my job, is to make them do this or do that all the time, or to make sure that they're always doing well. My job is to support them as much as I can and help them figure out who they want to be. We're just kind of going more the flow. There's more energy, that it's just more positive, and we aren't getting stuck. I mean, so often, Ned used the term buy-in, and just so often, parents ask me as a psychologist, how do I get my kid to see? I mean, I told him a million times, or I keep trying to get him to see. Well, imagine what the kid feels like. You feel like bombarding with all he's just batting them away. And I say, I tell kids, I don't believe in talking to kids into things. Well, I'll talk to them about it. What I tell kids is, I'm not trying to change you. I'm not trying to force you to do. I don't want anybody to try to force you, but you can make a good decision for yourself. Let's think through the pros and cons. And when I do that, when I let kids know that I'm not trying to force them, that I don't want anybody to force them, they make the best decisions. It's really just so striking if we do it so.
Oh my goodness, yes. I thank you both so much for everything you shared in this interview and in your book. For everybody listening, seriously, get this book. It is absolutely a game changer for parenting. What do you say? How to talk with kids to build motivation, stress tolerance, and a happy home by Dr. William Stixrud and Ned Johnson. Thank you both so much. Before we close the interview, I'd like to ask you both, where can people find your work? Ned, I'll start with you. Where can people find you, be it social media or elsewhere?
So we have a website that's whatdoyousaybook.com. You can find us there. And I sort of carry the water for Bill on social media. So my Twitter handle is Ned Johnson. And then I started doing TikTok, which is a riot. I think I probably have the energy for that, which is the other Ned Johnson. And so that's been kind of wackadoodle, but yeah, it's fine.
And Instagram as well, right? The other Ned Johnson.
Yep, and Instagram. Thank you. The other Ned Johnson on Instagram too.
Great. And
and we also have the self-drivenchild.com for our first book. We have a closed Facebook group from the Self-Driven Child.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much. I greatly appreciate you being here. And I look forward to hopefully working with you again soon if you write another book and just continuing to share your knowledge with the parents out there.
We'd enjoy that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.